Western civilization is moving closer to a point of irreconcilable, unstable equilibrium, as frighteningly increasing numbers of people trust nothing. Media, academia, and especially the governments are no longer held in high esteem. Regaining trust is often impossible after betrayal. However, transparency is essential to any healing process, and that is the essence of the Don Sullivan Show. Please listen to the team explore, probe, and debate cutting-edge science, technology, and computing. Play ball!
Welcome to a very special episode of the Don Sullivan Show. As you can hear, Don is currently on the road, and you're going to learn more about that very shortly. I'm your co-host, Jersey Steve. First, we want to thank our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by License Fortress, the industry's first and only software asset management firm to offer both a financial and legal guarantee at its highest level of service. Whether it's Oracle, Microsoft, or VMware, License Fortress helps organizations stay compliant, avoid audits, and save money. You can learn more at licensefortress.com. And please support our producer, our wonderful producer, Bill Axt, by visiting axtinc.com. That is AXTINK.com. You can subscribe to his YouTube channel and help support his efforts to create humorous animation, as well as run our website, all while researching a cure for baldness.
Welcome back to the Don Sullivan Show, everyone. Over the next month, we're going to take a little bit of a respite, as well as a lot of travel. I'll start off in a few minutes with the second segment after I start my travels. But I'm going to leave that a bit of a mystery at the moment and say that I really want to thank everyone, from the audience to my staff to the production folks, for passing this first year of the Don Sullivan Show, and we were able to do it without missing a single week. Until now, we are going to miss 2 weeks. Steve's going to put together a best of the Don Sullivan Show. I've already seen some previews of that, and it's pretty amazing. As well as we are going to miss a week or two during the times that I will be traveling halfway around the world. And again, I'll leave that as a mystery. But the Don Sullivan Show is dedicated, as you have all seen, to science, technology, and computing, taught on a level that can be absorbed and understood by your average high school student. And the reason for that, and I'll give you a little bit of a foundation of it, is that during the early times of this decade, we saw tremendous tribalism. And I really do believe, we believe as a staff here at the Don Sullivan Show, that was because people didn't even know what scientific questions to ask. They didn't understand what a virus was versus a bacteria. So many people. They didn't understand the size of a virus. They didn't understand what specifically a coronavirus actually meant. And so we allowed ourselves to be manipulated tremendously by forces in the media and the government from every possible different direction, and that has to stop. So the Don Sullivan Show is our small effort with a vast audience to address the very fundamental issues of science, technology, and computing in general. Of course, we're all Silicon Valley folks, people, workers, employees, junior executives. There is a whole plethora of different folks that are involved in this effort, both from a perspective of the guests as well as the perspective of the staff, and of course myself. I'm a 35-year veteran with a tremendous amount of broad and deep experience in areas of virtualization and database technology and other things. And I think it's really important to understand that what we do here in the Don Sullivan Show is try to retain a sense of humor, try to be entertaining, try to be very, very unpredictable. Unpredictable in the sense that you never know what we're going to discuss. Obviously, you've all seen us discuss in great deal of depth very important psychological and medical issues, as well as very sophisticated approaches towards computing. We're going to have more when we continue the series on artificial intelligence, the panels on artificial intelligence, the situation with personnel, as well as a lot more deep science. We're going to have an entire series on meteorology, an entire series on geology, which there are going to be many different guests on. We want to get into cosmology and different aspects of physics and so on. But we've also had episodes, and we will continue to have more on strange new sports like pickleball and pinball, as well as more traditional classic sports. Obviously, you all know that my life is really based on baseball. I think there is more wisdom in baseball than any other single thing in all of humanity that you can reference. In fact, I once had a big debate with somebody who believed that there was all the wisdom in the world that you needed through the Bible, and I claimed there's more wisdom in baseball than there was in the Bible, and it was a very interesting debate. I would love to have a debate like that on this show as well, and then actually I intend on it. We've had Ben Bunn talk about being a bush pilot in Alaska, as well as his foundational beliefs in creation science. So the breadth of what we do here on Don Sullivan Show is literally infinite. And back to sports, we've had Ron Sparagaski on to talk about fundamental sports, and Brad Marquez to talk about physical therapy, but we're also going to get much more in depth about baseball science. We're going to have guests on to talk about modern statistics, which I derisively refer to as fantasy baseball statistics, versus classic statistics, which I refer to as real baseball. But more importantly, we are going to have discussions on the injuries that occur in baseball, particularly with pitching, and even double particularly in with kids and pitchers with kids and the way they throw and so on. I'm working with a number of kids right now on learning how to throw properly. The mechanics are everything, and I'm going to have guests on to discuss that. We're going to have people come on to talk about the various different catastrophic injuries of football and hockey and soccer or European football, especially during the World Cup time period, I hope. We've also had series on where art meets engineering. Now, we have many sub-series with art meets engineering. We've already had with Rick Taylor. We have had an episode on architecture. We've had a number of episodes on timepieces. We're going to have a number of others. We've talked to Jason Hahn about timepieces. We're going to have guests on to talk about the design of timepieces. How in the world do you put all of the different pieces into a 10 millimeter watch that can actually have or maybe 20 different complications? Of course, that'll cost $100,000 with something like Patek Philippe, but it's absolutely amazing. So we want to have a design architect on to talk about that. We want to talk about the materials that go into some of these incredibly beautiful objects of jewelry and engineering. I want to talk about the natural stone, the meteorites. I've love looking at them and even collecting some of them myself. We're going to have an episode on counterfeit watches, which is an incredible blight on the industry itself. The industry is an incredibly fascinating industry overall for every possible reason. I like to quip that everything that's wrong and everything that's right about capitalism can be found in the timepiece industry, but particularly with fake watches that usually come out of China, get sold prolifically in Turkey, but existing in the United States almost at the same rate, especially for high-end watches, but not exclusively for high-end watches. Sub-$1,000 watches have the proliferation of fakes. In fact, I just bought one off the internet just to see if I could, very, very cheaply, but just to see if I could really tell and how the seller, who was from China, would react and how eBay would react. And it's really kind of interesting. So lots of incredible subjects that we're going to be discussing and covering. And I invite you to listen into every single episode and listen to me explain everything that I possibly can and interview all of our guests in the most humorous, entertaining, and informative ways that we can conceive of, and remind you at the end that all at-bats are situational. So with that little precursor note, please enjoy the next 4 episodes, which are going to take place with me running around some incredibly impressive areas in Africa. So when I get there, I'll start this episode, but I wanted to give you this precursor first. So until then, we will see you. Hello, fans of the Don Sullivan Show. We have an amazing treat for you over the next number of episodes. We're going to be traveling to the continent of Africa, an amazing continent with 54 countries, all of which have strange borders, and there's historic reasons for that. But the areas and the regions are absolutely vast. From a population perspective, the nation is, or the continent and all of its nations, are the youngest in the world. There is tremendous amount of resources overall. When I ran the program at VMware known as Virtualize Africa with a number of different partners, we traveled to many of these countries, but this will be a new country for me. I'm going to Tanzania. Now, a long time ago, when I was a distance runner, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, the greatest miler in the world for a short period of time was a guy named Filbert Bayi from Tanzania. Don't know if I'll get to meet him, but what I will get to meet is the staff and the crew that will be at Mount Kilimanjaro. And yes, I'm going to be attempting to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. Now, it's a very high mountain, and I'm of course used to going up to the heights of 13 and 14,000 feet in Colorado, but this one's at 19,300 feet. And yes, I have been to every space camp, in which that's at about 17,600 feet, but you go over 18,000 to get there. So this will be a new height for me. It is to a large extent a tourist hike. With a lot of altitude. It'll take 10 days to get up and down, and hopefully I'll make it. And then afterwards, we'll be going on a safari for 5 days in the Serengeti of the Kilimanjaro area of the country of Tanzania. So lots of really wild and interesting different things to talk about, to see, to observe, to describe, as we go through this wonderful, amazing area in central to East Africa. And I will be recording 4 separate episodes, one in which we will be climbing to the top, one when we are on top for a few days in the famous crater on the top of the volcano which makes Kilimanjaro, one on the way down. This is something I'm really quite afraid of. I've never gone down more than 5,000 feet in a single day, and I think we're going to at least do that in a couple of the days coming down. And then one when we are out on the safari. So we'll be doing a total of 4 separate episodes on this particular trip, and this will be very interesting for our basic and true-to-form philosophy. So I don't know how many people are familiar with baseball in Tanzania, but we're going to find out because I'll be talking the entire way.
Apparently, there is baseball in Tanzania. There is a Tanzania National Baseball League, TNBL. It began in 2023, so recent, but it is there, Don.
I've got all my education, all my medication. I'm going to get educated on what this particular area of Africa is like, and we will be with an entire team, a crew, and it'll be very interesting. I'll be breathing kind of hard, but we'll see what this is like. And when we get back from Africa at the beginning of March, well, then we'll have a whole different set of subjects to cover here on the Don Sullivan Show. So again, welcome everybody. This is just the beginning and the prelude of these 4 episodes, and we will talk to you soon. Steve will no doubt be making comments along the way, but I wanted to just start this off. And again, this is a sub-series of hiking and exploring and adventuring in the continent of Africa. And I will talk to you soon and see you until we're there. Hello, folks. I'm back. And I wanted to add a few comments in here generically before we actually start on this trek. We're staying at a place called The Ranch, hiking for 2 days in the shadow of Kilimanjaro with unbelievable animals, giraffes and elephants and monkeys, all seemingly very, very comfortable with us hiking all around them, although we do have an armed guard with us. Just doing some 3-mile hikes each day with the group that I'm with, and getting a little bit acclimatized. We're at 6,000 feet, or we're at about 6,000 feet for this particular climb. Now, there are 8 people in our group. To be terribly honest, I'm looking at everybody, and I'm a little bit unclear as to why some of these folks think that they ought to be doing this. This is a 19,000-foot mountain, and what is going to be a 10-day hike as part of this 12-day overall trek. But for the moment, we're having a good time. One thing that does concern me is that, and honestly, I had researched this quite extensively before we came to Africa, that Mount Kilimanjaro, which is one of the 7 summits, the 7 summits being the 7 highest points in each of the continents, Elbrus and Europe, and actually maybe Mount Blanc, depending on where one considers to the border of the continent of Europe to be. But of course, Everest in Asia, and Mount McKinley, which is actually the legal name, but the Denali Summit in Alaska for North America, Aconcagua in South America. And there are, Australia's got a peak of some kind, and the peak in Antarctica is harder to get to probably than it really is to climb. But generally speaking, of the 7 summits, Kilimanjaro is thought to be the easiest. It probably is. It is a lot of altitude, but for the most part, it's going to be a long tourist hike with guides and porters and tents that are set up for us, and both administrative tents as well as personal tents, and also a kitchen tent and bathroom tents and so on. But what we were told to begin with, and you can research this, is that the rainy season, there really aren't in Tanzania, which is just below the equator. There really aren't 4 seasons. There's what they call a rainy season, or a wet season, and a dry season. And the wet season is supposed to start in March, but according to the forecast, unfortunately, it looks like it's going to come a little bit early, because once we start, in fact, today, when we're doing these short hikes, it looks like we're going to have rain every day, and I'm not sure what that rain is going to be like at 15,000 feet. We do have microspikes. We do have adequate, correct clothing. I'm not sure I brought enough of certain things, because I didn't think I would need certain aspects of clothing, but because it's going to be dry, I'm always worried about getting wet. I tend to get cold wet pretty easily and shiver. But I think this is going to be fun. It's going to be tremendously challenging. It's something that I've wanted to do my entire life. I know the great CEO of VMware and later Intel, Pat Gelsinger, did Mount Kilimanjaro in, I think, the 2017 timeframe, the same time I did Everest Base Camp. and maybe I'll reach out to him after this is done. I will have some pictures if I make it to the top. But with that, we'll stop here for a moment, and I will get back to you. I want to give you all a little bit of history of climbing Kilimanjaro. So for the moment, let's take a pause, and I'll get back very soon, and we're going to talk about some of the history of climbing Kilimanjaro. So again, folks, let me give you a little bit of a history lesson before we set out on this endeavor. And by the way, it is actually right now outside. You can't hear it, I hope, because it's quite loud. It is pouring rain in this day in late February, so it does look like the rainy season might come a little bit early. So this is going to be more challenging than I expected. So a guy named Ludwig Pertschiller and a local Shaka guide. Shaka is one of the major tribes in the Kilimanjaro area, along with the Maasai, named Yohani Kinlea Lawu, first climbed Kilimanjaro in the late 1880s, October 6th, 1889 specifically. There was a lot of exploration that was done beforehand. Tanzania as a country has bounced back and forth between various different oppressive colonizations. The Germans at first. The Germans lost it after the end of World War I. The British took it over. That's why everybody drives on the wrong side of the road there, because the British influence is still pretty strong. But for the most part, the folks and all the people that we have met so far, their native languages are Swahili, and they do speak pretty good English overall. But between each other, they speak Swahili. Or when they just don't want us to know what they're saying. But this group that I'm going to be with is 8 strong, with about 50 to 70 support personnel overall. And I'm a little bit disconcerted with what is clearly a very underpaid group of extremely capable. Oh my God, they all look like they're 4-minute milers. They're in such perfect shape, and they move around so well, and they carry things so well. We haven't started yet, and I'm already impressed by them. So I digress as usual, but Kilimanjaro became a national park in Tanzania in 1973. Of course, it had gained tremendous fame 50 to 75 years earlier, when the great American author Ernest Hemingway wrote what is basically a love story and an adventure story, The Snows of Kilimanjaro. And we'll have a lot of references here to Ernest Hemingway and different versions of Don Sullivan Show. He's a particular fan of mine. He's also an incredible study in psychology and diseases of malaise, as my climbing partner, Mr. Campbell, likes to refer to them as. But there were a number of different missionary attempts through the middle 1800s. Failed attempts went on, mostly because they didn't know exactly where the routes were. You had to find routes. You look up at Kilimanjaro, and it is a volcano. It is a massive volcano. It's not a super volcano. It has a caldera in the middle, or at the top, which we will talk about when we get to the top, assuming we get to the top. But it is for the most part, we're going to be doing the Grand Traverse Trail, which goes from the west side of the mountain all the way around to the east side, northeast side, near the Kenyan border. There was for a while a dispute as to actually whether it was Kenya or Tanzania, who actually had Mount Kilimanjaro within their borders, and many years ago it was determined that it was well within the Tanzanian border, but there is a route that goes up from Kenya directly from the northeast. We'll actually be connecting with that route at some point, probably around day 5, I think. But so we're going to be doing some altitude, going up to 14,000, sleeping up there. We'll see how some people in this group react to the altitude, because that is pretty high. Again, that's as high as you get in the continental United States in the Colorado mountains. And the oxygen is around 60% of the oxygen at sea level. That is at 14,000 feet. So when you get up higher, it's even lower. So, actually at 20,000 feet, the oxygen content is less than 50%, about 45% of what it is at sea level, which again, when you go higher into areas above 28,000 feet on the 8,000 meter peaks in Nepal, I consider that to be the death zone. Very few people can survive multiple days without supplemental oxygen higher than that altitude. In fact, I have heard, it may be mythology, that if you took somebody who lived at sea level and you put them at the top of Mount Everest at 29,000 feet, they would be dead in 10 minutes. But the whole idea is to acclimatize as much as possible. So we're going to be climbing up to 14,000 feet and down to 12,000 feet, down to 11,000 feet, back to 14,000 feet. And then finally on day 8 of the hike, day 10 of the trek, we will be making the last push towards the summit. And we'll see, it looks like it's going to be rain, which means snow. We'll be doing that from the south, which is supposed to be a lot drier, we will see. But we'll be going up 4,000 feet. From approximately 15,000 feet to 19,000 feet, starting at 4 o'clock in the morning, hopefully making the summit around 8 to 9 o'clock, and then spending a few hours up there and then returning down, which should be as difficult as climbing to begin with. And I will be very open as to how I'm feeling and what we are doing. I, of course, am on certain medications that give me a little bit of difficulty catching my breath, and it's been at 13 and 14,000 feet. We'll see how it lasts. The cardiologist that I go to says it really isn't going to be an issue as long as I am slow. And by the way, the term in Swahili for taking it easy or going slow is poli-poli. And they've already told me that way too many times. I'm getting tired of it. But that's the term they like to use constantly to try to get you to slow down.
Just a few additional facts about Mount Kilimanjaro. Obviously, what Don's been talking about doing this for a while, and I certainly wanted him to have a good time and come back so we could do more podcasts together. So apparently about 50,000 people attempt to climb Mount Kilimanjaro a year. Roughly 10 tourist deaths per year reported, which I think is like 0.03%. So it's certainly not like Everest or K2 or anything like that. From what I understand, it's non-technical, but it is grueling. And 19,000 feet is high. I'm reading on the Climbing Kilimanjaro website that around 1,000 people are evacuated yearly, most recovering at lower altitudes. But it seems like the biggest danger is altitude sickness, going up to about 19,000 feet. So that's, as Don described, that's why you have to do those, acclimatization treks back and forth up and down the mountain.
So back to Tanzania and the actual ascent, the climbing of Kilimanjaro. It was in 1909 somebody named Gertrude Benham first achieved the actual ascent of Kilimanjaro. And really, I think what the biggest accomplishment of that was is establishing a route. Because nothing is technical, I know that. Looking up at it right now, it is absolutely massive, but for the most part, you're going up couloirs at about 40 or 45 degrees. I would say 40 degrees, and that's most of what I've read, that the trail goes up. So Gertrude was able to find one of the routes that actually made it up in the safest possible way in 1909. But when Tanzania gained its independence, the summit, the actual peak, was renamed Uhuru, U-H-R, Uhuru, meaning freedom in Swahili. So there are a number of different peaks, and this is true in most volcanoes. It's true in Mount Rainier. There's the mountain, and then on top of it there are a number of peaks, and there's the highest of the peaks, and Uhuru is 19,341 feet. So once Kilimanjaro became a national park, it was quickly named and designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site. That's a whole discussion for a different day. There is really good aspects of being a UNESCO UN national or World Heritage Site, and there's some bad aspects of it. Generally speaking, in the United States, there's places like Mesa Verde and Colorado and the Grand Canyon are UNESCO sites, but around the United States is not always in favor of it because it does give contractual rights to the United Nations for things like restoring or rebuilding buildings. Like, for instance, when the Grand Canyon's North Rim Grand Canyon Lodge burned down for the third time this year, they do have to check with UNESCO or get approved through UNESCO the rebuilding of all of these sites and so on, as well as any type of actual land activity that goes on. National parks, or in general, it's a worldwide concept, are very, very protected from any type of commercial activity, that is mining or even grazing and farming, or conservation areas of all different kinds. There's about 14 different designations in the United States inside the National Park Service and the Department of the Interior, inside the Department of Agriculture with the Forest Service as well. But these national parks are generally very, very protected. And that is certainly the case for Kilimanjaro National Park, which again became a national park in 1973. The UNESCO, I shouldn't say it happened that quickly. It was 14 years later. It was 1987 where Kilimanjaro became a UNESCO site. So, as I was kind of alluding to, the rest of the world, literally the entire rest of the world, finds themselves very honored and very happy, and wind up getting funding, often from the United States, because the United States is the greatest funder of all UN programs by an order of magnitude, and the UNESCO program is not any different from that. So places all around the world, when they get a UNESCO designation and they agree to the restrictions and sometimes the oppressive limitations of the UNESCO program, they wind up getting a lot of money from the UN and UNESCO to actually support and to assure that those sites remain as they are. So that's a little bit of the history of Mount Kilimanjaro. Gregory Peck and Ernest Hemingway aside, this week is going to be about this little group that I'm with, the amazing, wonderful staff that's going to help us try to summit. There are many others. It looks like there's going to be 10 or 15 other groups from different routes they're going to summit. We are going to get on the Grand Traverse route. There are a number of others. The Grand Traverse route is 10 days, but if you want to be a little bit more aggressive, you can go up in 6 days, 7 days, 9 days. So we'll see how this goes. So tomorrow we will be beginning the actual hike. Again, this is a 12-day trek with a 10-day hike to the summit, and we'll see how this goes. So until then, we will see you. Hello again, folks. Don Sullivan is back from the Don Sullivan Show. When I recorded the opening, it was 3 days ago when I had started flying on Monday, and I've just arrived here at Kilimanjaro Airport in a Planet Lodges hotel near Kilimanjaro Airport. My first time in Tanzania, although loyal listeners to the Don Sullivan Show know I've been in Africa many times. This is the first time I've been in Tanzania, home of the once world record holder at 350.1 in the mile run, Mr. Philbert Bailly from, I guess he held the record in the very early 70s before John Walker on under 350. But as usual, I digress. I'm pretty out of it after 30 hours of flying flying from Denver into London, and then 12-hour layover, and then flying to Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, which I've been to many times. By the way, the airport is getting much, much better. Still incredibly chaotic boarding planes, but other than that, it was pretty good. They actually had some luxury shops, which just absolutely amazed me. Stephen will comment that I'm definitely going to buy a watch to commemorate this trip in one of the luxury shops on the way back, assuming I do make it on the way back. And then after another 6-hour layover, another 3-hour flight here, and now I am here in Kilimanjaro Airport. We're here for 2 nights at this hotel, and then we start up the largest peak in Africa. I'm going to come back on in a few hours here and talk a little bit about the volcanic structure of the Rift Valley of East Africa, how East Africa is actually, or the far eastern part of Africa is actually breaking off, and 50 million years ago will be a new continent with a new ocean in between them through the Rift Valley. The incredible capabilities of the distance runners, my old and still first love in life is running, of course, and so 40 years ago I had a lot of interaction with a lot of the great distance runners from this area of the world, and so we'll talk about all of that, and then 2 days from now we start up the mountain. So my friend and partner, Mr. Sean Campbell, possibly future governor of New Jersey, will be joining us tomorrow night. This is February 11th, by the way. It's about 80 degrees out, very dry, but actually pretty nice overall. So I'll be back a little bit later to do a little bit of a geology and history lecture. I won't be too hard on the British. Yes, I will, actually. But we'll talk about all of that, and then we'll get back. I will give you an itinerary of the various 4 episodes of the Don Sullivan Show that are going to occur. I'm going to record on this trip to Africa. I'm going to record the ascent up to 19,300 feet. I'm going to record a couple of days in a separate episode that we will spend up at the top. Hopefully I won't have altitude sickness. I was fine at Mount Everest Base Camp a decade ago, so I think I'll be okay. Don't ever get higher than 14,000 in Colorado, and this will be at 19. We'll be at over 16 for at least 5 days. And then I will record a different episode on the way down. On day 11, we're going to be taking a safari for 5 days through the Serengeti of the Kilimanjaro area in Tanzania, which is supposed to be absolutely spectacular. So we're going to do 4 overall episodes here, and Steve will have lots of fun augmenting my narrative and my narration throughout all this time. So we will talk to you soon, everybody. So until later tonight, see ya. Hi folks, it's Don again. I promised you that I would give you an overview on the Great Rift Valley. Now, a lot of what I'm going to talk about here you could look up yourself on Wikipedia or any number of other hundreds of sites. Heck, just ask Gemini, I suppose. But what I want to do is give you a perspective on the Rift Valley, both from a geological perspective as well as a political, cultural perspective, from the standpoint of me being a young distance runner back in the 80s. So to start off with, the Rift Valley itself is an enormous split down the far eastern part of Africa. It really goes from the Red Sea down to Mozambique for what is basically a couple of 1,000 miles, and it will eventually, 50 million years from now, result in an entire massive part of Africa breaking off into effectively an island, but an island the size of Greenland, all the way from Somalia through Kenya, through Tanzania, all the way again into the area around Mozambique. And it's part of the African plate, but there are subplates, subtectonic plates down below East African area that will, as I said, 50 million years from now, move off further to the east and effectively create, I don't know if you'd call it a separate ocean, but it'd certainly be another sea that will eventually rush in and separate those two parts of what is now Africa. There are hundreds of volcanoes, the largest of which is Mount Kilimanjaro, and that's what myself and the hopefully future governor of New Jersey, the questionable state of New Jersey, I don't want to call it the great state, will be climbing on tour over the next 10 days. And 5 days after that, I'll be doing a safari in the Serengeti area of Kilimanjaro National Park. So I actually had to look it up, but I wanted to be precise with the geological references to how the African plate through the Rift Valley, or the East African Rift, and that divergent plate boundary, as they refer to it, are going to eventually split up into what's called the Nubian plate and the Somali plate. Not really sure why they gave it those names, but that's what they did. So we're talking about the countries of Somalia, down through Ethiopia and Kenya and Tanzania, and all the way down into Mozambique. And from a whole different perspective, an athletic perspective, a global athletic perspective, this is the area of the world that produces the greatest distance runners that the world has ever seen. Now, every country has its great runners, and Sebastian Coe and Steve Cram and Steve Ovett from the United Kingdom, and Marty LaCouri and Jim Ryan and Steve Scott, and these are all contemporaries of mine from the 80s or 70s and 80s in the United States. And of course, the United States has different types of runners, the sprinters more than anything. But it's pretty amazing the degree of the percentage of people that come from this area of the world who aren't necessarily great athletes in other areas. Of course, we know of great basketball players that have come from Africa, but that's the other side of Africa. It's West Africa. That's the Nigeria, where Hakeem Olajuwon came from, and Joel Embiid and Pascal Siakam are from Cameroon. But that's the entire other area. And one of the things that's really important to understand, Africa is absolutely huge. So it's about twice the width of the United States in the northern area of Africa, if you're going from what's effectively the Arabian Sea all the way across into the Atlantic. But this great Rift Valley area is not only an incredible geologic concept to study and to understand, with the most prominent feature of it all being Mount Kilimanjaro at 19,300 plus feet, but it produces this very unique capability. And I'll tell you, when you go to Kenya, you go here, as I am in Tanzania, every single person, male or female, this is true in Ethiopia as well, is incredibly fit. And whether they're tall or short, I've always thought this, that they just seem like and I don't even ask if they are athletes or not, but you look right at them and they certainly look like distance runners. They look like people who are incredibly just overall healthy. So that's pretty amazing. There are a number of different mountains, volcanoes in this area, Mount Kenya, and a number of others that are very powerful, dormant, not extinct volcanoes, and Kilimanjaro is that. Kilimanjaro is, of course, a tremendously popular tourist hike. There are very few areas that are technical at all, maybe 2.5 from what I've read and talked to other people about in terms of the level of actual rock climbing. A couple of different areas. I don't remember the name of it, but there's a wall. It takes about 2 hours to climb up, and it looks very similar to much of what I have already done many, many times in Colorado. Even we did a Don Sullivan Show on climbing Mount Bierstadt, and the very top of it, the last quarter mile, is nothing but extremely difficult boulders to get up and down, and that's what this looks like. Very similar to some of the areas I was in this summer in Austria as well, but that's what you expect when you're trying to get up very high mountains, especially even if they are, for the most part, long tourist hikes, many days with a lot of altitude. Of course, the altitude is the big thing, even coming from Colorado and having spent a lot of time this year or last year in 2025 at high altitudes. I have to be relatively careful about it, especially with some of my other medical conditions. And a lot of different tourists who end up coming here and just thinking, mostly kids, a lot of from the United States, particularly the East Coast, and think they're going to be able to just climb up with the tour guides and they're going to take care of them and then come down, and they wind up getting very sick. Altitude sickness, which can be very, very serious. It can lead to, in the worst case, pulmonary edemas and so on. But in the best case scenario, you can throw up. And I've seen this before. I've seen people who spend 3 or 4 days at altitude, 16,000 feet and above, start throwing up like it's their freshman first case of beer kind of sickness. And your oxygen level gets down into the 60s, so at sea level it should be right at 100, and if you're sick or something wrong with you, maybe in the 80s. In Denver, most people will sit around 95. When I'm up in the 14,000 foot range, your oxygen can go down to about 80. But if you get down into the 60s and you spend a few days in the 60s, in terms of your oxygen content in your blood, you can get very, very sick. So you have to really take care of that. And to be honest, it has nothing to do at all with your level of fitness. It can just hit anybody at any time. So despite the fact that I've spent dozens of days at 12,000 feet to 14,000 feet in the last 9 months, who knows what'll happen. Plus, given the popularity and the crowds that go up and down this mountain, this is the best time of the year. It's the dry season. It'll start getting into the rainy season in March. So we're in the middle of February, early February still, actually, that we'll have a lot of time to get up and down, hopefully without any rain at all. It's pretty dry. It's not that hot. Certainly not Arizona kind of hot. So it looks like it's going to be excellent conditions overall for a good climb up for 10 days back and forth. So we won't talk too much about some of the unstable political aspects of these different countries. What I will tell you is that whenever I come to any of these areas, any of these countries, Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania, I haven't been to Tanzania before, but it certainly follows the exact pattern that I've seen in the other East African countries, which is a pattern, again, that I saw 40 years ago when I was a pretty serious distance runner and I competed with so many of those great East African distance runners. They were all extremely nice people. Very, very competitive they were, almost in a comical sense at times. I'll maybe give you some tidbits and some anecdotes of that as we are climbing up and I can barely breathe over the next 10 days. It will be interesting and it will be experimental to see how I respond to the various different medications that I'm on, particularly the beta-blocker vasodilator named Cardaeval that I've been on for now 7 years. It does seem to bother me. It does seem to cause my breathing to get out of sync at about 13,000 feet. It has many times this year. That apparently is normal, a vasodilator. acts like a governor in your heart, with a beta blocker part of it, I guess. I mean, I'm getting a little bit over my skis talking about the specific drug interactions here, but the beta blocker aspect of it, from what I understand, just simply governs your heart and will allow it to go over about 180 beats. And when you're really pushing it up at high altitude, your body would like your heart to go faster than that. I certainly, as a distance runner back in 40 years ago, could push up to about 220. And when your heart is not in sync with how much you're breathing, it becomes very weird. It's not like you're desperately out of breath, as if you just finished a race. It's more like you just can't get your breath, your breathing, and your heart in sync. So we will see what that's like. I will give you an honest report on how beta blockers, or at least with me, behave for 5 days or so at these altitudes we're going to be at. So I will get back on the recording here sometime tomorrow when we actually start to hike. So until then, we'll see you. Well, hello, folks. Today, we have arrived at Ndarakwai Camp. It's near the base of Mount Kilimanjaro, which is what will serve as the location for our initial acclimatization, as well as we are going to start a hike up the big volcano sometime tomorrow. It's an amazing kind of place, and the savannah sort of really reminds me of say the southwest of Colorado, northwest of New Mexico, except with a lot more bush trees and a lot of very big animals. So just driving in here, we went through literally small herds of giraffes and zebras. And as I'm sitting here right now looking through the screen of the tent, the big tent that I'm in, I'm seeing some form of monkeys running around. I think they're baboons, but there are a lot of them running around, and they're very curious. I suppose they're like this with all tourists around here. And it's all very interesting. Feel totally fine. There is nothing in particular that is bothering me very much, and I expect this all to at least initially start off pretty well. So it's just a short segment here before me and this 8-person group, along with my friend Sean, who will make some comments later, we will all get started sometime tomorrow. We're going to go on a night drive to search for game at night after dark to see try to see if we can see how the various different animals in the local area, which are plentiful to say the least, as I just mentioned, behave. And tomorrow we'll be, as I said, starting up the mountain. So we'll get back. I'll end this short segment, and we'll get back to you tomorrow. So until then, see ya. Hello, everyone. This is Don. I'm back again in the afternoon of our first days of the Kilimanjaro trek. I mispronounced the name of the ranch that we were staying at yesterday. It's actually Ndarakwai. And we will be doing some very interesting things this evening. It poured rain this afternoon. We will be doing a nighttime safari. I also mentioned that we were in the Serengeti, and it is certainly the Serengeti area, and you can refer to the Serengeti area as everything in the entire area, both Kenya and in Tanzania, as the western shadow of Kilimanjaro out for 100 miles or more. But there is a Serengeti National Park, and there is a Serengeti area around that expands north into Kenya, so I should be more accurate with how I'm describing that. So I'll endeavor to do that better as we move along. But I'm going to end this first episode of The Crown of Africa here. And that will be for this week. And I'll be back on with another recording, although for me it's just tomorrow as we start on the real adventure of the trek, both here in Naraqui and then the 10 days of hiking up Kilimanjaro in a few hours. But I'm going to end this episode, and I will tell you this, that no matter where I am, as I always say, no matter what I'm doing, whether or not I'm getting ready to hike up the biggest and highest mountain in Africa, or Mount Everest Base Camp, or at the Grand Canyon, or in the Colorado 14, or talking about artificial intelligence or a medical problem, some other aspect of science, which we will be talking about many times, there is one thing, and one thing at all, that dictates or in some way informs my life. And I always have to remember myself that under all circumstances, and you should too, all circumstances, that all at-bats are situational.